Welcome back to Justice Redesign. I'm your host, Steve Teskey, retired judge, and this episode continues our ongoing series examining the legal, moral, and institutional debates surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, throughout this series, we have looked beyond the slogans. We have challenged the myth that merit exists in a vacuum. We've examined the danger of pretending neutrality is the same thing as fairness. And we have asked, what happens when civil rights are turned upside down, when inclusion is recast as discrimination, and when accountability is treated as an attack? But today, I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, not away from DEI, but deeper into it. Because at the heart of the debate is not simply a policy dispute, folks. It is a struggle over memory. Who gets remembered? Who gets forgiven? Who gets protected from discomfort? And who is expected to carry the burden of history quietly, politely, and without making anyone else feel accused? This episode is titled Grace for the Oppressor. And I want to be clear from the start. This is not an argument against grace. Grace is essential. Grace is human. Grace is often what allows people, families, communities, and even nations to move forward. But grace becomes dangerous when it is aimed in the wrong direction. That's what this episode is about, part one and part two. When grace is extended first to those who cause harm, while those who suffer the harm are told to be patient. When grace becomes a shield for power, instead of a balm for the wounded. When grace is used to soften accountability, excuse historical injustice, or make the descendants of oppression feel comfortable before the descendants of the oppressed have even been heard. That is not healing. That is avoidance wearing the language of mercy. In the DEI debate, we often hear calls to move on, to stop talking about race, to let the past stay in the past, to show grace to those who are uncomfortable with change. Oh, God bless their heart. But the question is not whether grace matters. The question is, grace for whom? For the people still living with the consequences of exclusion, or for the people who are tired of being reminded that exclusion ever happened? Because when grace moves too quickly toward the powerful, it can become another form of injustice. And when a society offers comfort to the oppressor before it offers repair to the oppressed, it has not transcended history, folks. It has simply learned how to avoid it. So today, we're going to talk about memory, accountability, forgiveness, and the moral danger of extending grace in a way that preserves the very imbalance we claim to oppose. Because justice does not require cruelty, but it does require honesty. And sometimes, before grace can heal, truth has to speak. Welcome back. I want to say this at the outset here, because there's no point pretending otherwise. This episode is personal. It's personal because what we are witnessing right now isn't a disagreement over policy. It is not a debate about process, and it is not an honest discussion about history. It is, and listen to this, it is a moral evasion. And I'm tired, deeply tired, of watching people defend cruelty by calling it context and justify humiliation by calling it heritage. So today, I'm going to say plainly what too many people refuse to say out loud. But before I dive deep into this topic about moral evasion, I need to share this preamble that is the thesis and theme of this presentation. And it is this: the most revealing demand of this moment is not for neutrality, nor even for silence. but for grace. Not grace for the enslaved, the excluded, or the dispossessed, but grace for those who benefited from their exclusion and now resent being asked to account for it. We are told to be understanding, to be patient, to forgive history without reckoning, and to treat discomfort as injury. But grace, untethered from responsibility, is not reconciliation. It is absolution without repentance. And when a society begins extending mercy upward while demanding endurance downward, it is no longer pursuing justice. It is protecting power. And now, the rest of the story. I recently read about a case involving schools that removed Confederate names after the murder of George Floyd, only to have those names restored years later, that is recently, during this renewed political assault on the so-called wokeness. Now in court, a defense attorney asked a question that should stop every honest person cold. And the operative phrase here is honest person, okay? How would a man from Georgia, born in 1820, even though slavery was wrong, doesn't he deserve grace? That was the question asked of an expert witness, okay? Now let's sit with that for a moment. Let's let it resonate in your head. How would a man from Georgia, born in 1820, even know slavery was wrong, doesn't he deserve grace? Well, that question assumes something that is not true, never was true, and is frankly insulting to anyone who understands history. The idea that enslavers and Confederate leaders didn't know better, is a lie. Is a lie we tell to protect ourselves from moral accountability. They knew. Come on. They just chose otherwise. Slavery was not morally ambiguous in the 19th century. It was condemned openly, loudly, and persistently. Abolitionists condemned it. Enslaved people resisted it at unimaginable risk, by the way. Religious leaders denounced it as sin. Philosophers denounced it as a violation of natural law. Great Britain abolished it before the American Civil War. And millions of Americans fought a war because slavery was viewed as immoral. So let's stop pretending ignorance was the problem. Ignorance was not the problem. Hello, is anyone home? Come on, indifference was. Self-interest was. Power was. Now, let's talk about grace, right? Because that word is doing a lot of dishonest work here. Grace is not owed to those who bought and sold human beings, ripped children from their parents, raped enslaved women as property, built wealth on coerced labor, and launched a war to preserve racial bondage. Grace is owed to the enslaved. Grace is owed to their descendants. Grace is owed to citizens who still carry the psychological, social, and biological trauma of that system. Trauma we now know is intergenerational and passed down. To offer grace upward to the architects of oppression while demanding silence and resilience from their victims, that's not reconciliation, folks. That is moral gaslighting. This is black and white. There's no gray on this. It is moral gaslighting. Some people respond by saying, hey, you can't judge the past by today's standards. Well, that argument collapses instantly. We do not excuse genocide because it was once legal. We do not excuse child labor because it was once common. We do not excuse the subjugation of women because it was once normalized. Moral crimes do not expire. They clarify. If slavery was immoral then, and it remains immoral now, and time does not cleanse it. So when people ask whether Confederate leaders deserve grace, what they're really asking is whether we are willing to lie to ourselves to preserve comfort. Now, in part 2, we're going to confront what this means today, what it means to force black children to attend schools named after those who fought to enslave their ancestors. and why calling that neutral is one of the most dishonest moves in American public life. People, please stay with me for part 2. Until then, be safe. Take care. Bye.